In the early 1700s, England began implementing mercantilism on the colonies in America. The British made the colonies import their raw materials to them, and then the British would sell the final products back to the colonies for a higher price. Britain passed the Navigation Acts to restrict the colonists from trading with other countries and stop smuggling to uphold the policy of mercantilism and British profits. Colonists largely ignored these acts and continued their profitable smuggling. Salutary neglect was when the colonies were not being directly governed by England, as England was busy fighting in Europe. Colonies experimented with self-governance and enjoyed personal freedoms during this time. In 1756, the French and Indian War began. The colonists, British, and Prussians, modern-day Germans, came together to fight the French, their Indian allies, Spain, Austria, and Russia. The conflict began when Virginians, who had a loose claim on areas in the Ohio River Valley, set out to claim the land, sending George Washington and some troops. Washington and his men attacked a small French detachment and were subsequently routed. This led to a war fought around the globe. Britain eventually emerged victorious, having defeated France thoroughly in Germany, and therefore preventing them from sending enough troops to the New World. This war led to more colonial unity through the Albany Congress, and also left Britain with the largest empire and the highest debt. Because of this war, the Proclamation Line of 1763 was created by Britain. This prohibited the colonists from moving into the Ohio River Valley in order to prevent another war.
To pay for the French and Indian War debt, Britain's Prime Minister George Grenville had the idea to tax the colonies since they had been the ones protected and fought for. 3 laws were implemented into the colonist life. First, the Sugar Act, which was a tax imported on goods, specifically sugar. Next was the Quartering Act, which said colonists had to provide food and quarters for the British soldiers staying there. Last was the Stamp Act. This act forced colonists to buy stamped paper or affix stamps to paper goods. The colonists were angered by these taxes. They believed them to be unfair, especially since the colonists had no representation in the Parliament. The leaders of this outcry were the Sons and Daughters of Liberty. Led by Samuel Adams, this group led the non-importation movement, encouraging colonists to stop buying British goods until these laws were repealed. They often tarred and feathered violators of the non-importation agreements, ransacked the houses of unpopular officials, and hung the effigies of stamp agents. They were so effective with these tactics that all the stamp agents were forced to resign before the act was even enforced.
Tensions between the colonists and Britain grew. The colonists were not obeying the laws that Britain had implemented, and so Britain decided to send more and more soldiers over called redcoats. Many colonists hated the redcoats, and on March 5, 1770, colonists taunted and threw snowballs at British soldiers. They were angry because an 11-year-old boy had been killed in a protest earlier. The soldiers fired on the people. Crispus Attucks, an African-American, was killed first, and later used to support the abolitionist movement. Both sides were at fault, but the colonists used this massacre as propaganda to raise outrage. When the British East India Company was going bankrupt, Parliament gave them the monopoly on the American tea market. Even though the tea was now cheaper, the Americans got upset because it effectively enforced the tea tax left from the Townshend Acts. The law was enforced, and the colonies tried to stop ships from coming into the harbor. The governor of Massachusetts made the colony accept the tea, but a group of Bostonians, dressed up as Native Americans, to dump tea off the ships into the Boston harbor. This event was dubbed the Boston Tea Party. Many of the colonists applauded this action and burnt tea in solidarity. Because of the Boston Tea Party, Parliament passed harsh laws called the Intolerable Acts. The port of Boston was shut down. Town meetings were shut down. The British officials responsible for colonial deaths were tried in British courts, and the Quartering Acts were revised, forcing people to house British soldiers in their own homes.